This is an open field. In the realm of creativity, this seems optimal. In this wonderful open field of possibilities, you can choose anything your mind desires. You can let your creativity shine, as there are no limitations and no boundaries. When I wanted a unique idea for a project, I tried to get myself as close to this metaphorical field as I could. But the closer I get, the more I ask, what do I do? I end up staring at a blank screen with no idea how to get started. Even though I have all the options available to me, I can't think of a good idea. Raise your hand if you felt this. That's most of you. This is the problem I and you all come across far too often. When I finally get the freedom I need, I have no ideas. The more restricted projects always led me to think more creatively than the open field projects. Imposing constraints makes the creative process easier and actually drives thinking in creative and novel ways. A cognitive psychologist, Prof. Cardinal Trump, sums up this open field idea quite nicely. She says it's a nice myth to think of creativity as an endless, open field of possibilities. But the reality is, when people face such a wonderful open field, they might become paralyzed. Constraints are the anchors of creativity. Creativity is simply the ability to come up with new ideas. And with this talk, I will be making being creative easier for all of you. And I'm going to be doing that with creative constraints. When the quote was referencing constraints, it was referring to creative constraints. Here is an example of a creative constraint. In a study from Rider University Psychology Department, 46 undergraduates were split into two groups, both of which had to make rhymes for greeting cards. One group could do whatever they wanted to make these rhymes, but the other group was given just 8 specific nouns to use. But despite it, or because of it, they were deemed to have more creative rhymes after an evaluation by a judge. Engineering also uses creativity. An example of this is General Electric and their electrocardiograph. They were presented with a challenge. They had to make the scans cost less than $1 each. Not only that, though, they had to make it battery-powered and available in rural areas, all while boasting the world's latest technology. And with these constraints, they managed to creatively make their electrocardiograph that fit these strict conditions. However, say they could have done whatever they wanted. They could have made it cost $200 per scan and not battery-powered, but that's boring and already done. That's why constraints are so powerful. A lack of resources leads to increased creativity as well. A study in 2015 showed that when people had access to a vast variety of resources, they weren't motivated to think in creative ways. But when people didn't have access to those resources, they were forced to think outside the box, and that's what sparked their creativity. NASA worked on designing a lander for Mars. This is the Viking 2 lander. This lander was designed to scan for life forms on Mars. The engineering team encountered problems as they worked, however. The gas fumes of the lander were contaminating soil samples below it. Not only did they have to develop an efficient solution, but also make it compatible with the size they wanted to make it. Constraints don't only come in a lack of resources. Time is a natural common constraint as well. Google forced strict time constraints on their workers and had them finish in a creative way that met that time requirement. Okay, I just showed that these constraints exist naturally in the real world, but constraints don't only come naturally. Choosing to use constraints on purpose is commonly done. Here's an example. We all know Dr. Seuss, but why is he famous? He produced popular books that were readable by many young children because of the simple vocabulary. The fact that he had to rhyme words in his books, all while keeping the simple vocabulary, was a constraint that made his books interesting. In one of his books, Green Eggs and Ham, he limited his vocabulary to just 50 different words, and that book became a bestseller. So the more constraints, the better? That doesn't make sense. If you think about it, drowning yourself in constraints doesn't seem practical. In a research project, people found that when people had too little constraints, they lacked a focus. But with excessive constraints, they were too stressed, which is also not conducive to creativity. They found that creativity followed a curve. This is a graph that sums that up. The most creative you will be is when you find yourself right in the center of this curve, with a reasonable, balanced amount of restrictions. In a study from 2018, people analyzed many organizations and teams, and they found that people benefited most with a healthy dose of constraints. Again, the creativity curve, the healthy dose, was referring to the vertex of this graph. The open field is not super ideal, so here are some creative thinking tips. First off, analyze what constraints already exist. Ask, what is the time limit for this? Ask, how many resources do I have? For a creative boost, embrace these constraints. Make constraints why your idea is unique. After that, give yourself some on purpose. Limit your word count in your writing. Purposely reduce the budget on your project. Thirdly, this conclusion actually used a constraint. It used exactly 7 words per sentence. Thank you.